if you think about humans, right? Humans have been able to take over and utterly dominate the world, and even accidentally genocide all kinds of species of animals. In most cases, without even intending or even realizing that that's what we're doing. And humans got into this position of power entirely because of our minds, right? Like our minds enabled us to create like tools, technology, better work together collectively, and cooperate and do all of these things. And then now imagine an AI that beats humans on that exact same metric, right? By a factor of like a 10,000, right? Then the question is like, well, what's going to happen to humans? And the big risk here is the comes from this argument of that I call well, two arguments, right? One argument is the difficulty of alignment, and the second argument is instrumental convergence. So the difficulty of alignment is basically the difficulty of like just making a thing that has the same kinds of goals that we have. And this is like a surprisingly hard problem that we just have no idea how to do, right? And like there have been like plenty of these myths and legends in history that kind of talk about the alignment problem, right? So like there's King Midas who like famously got the touch that turned everything into gold, and then of course he ended up dying of starvation. Then there was I forget who, but the Greek like mythical figure who wished for immortality but forgot to wish for eternal youth, right? And so there's like the problem that if you don't perfectly specify what you want, then like there's lots of ways for that to be just like slightly satisfied in a slightly different way.
Do you guys remember that? I think it was an Edgar Allan Poe short story called like the Monkey's Paw or something like this, where the character receives a monkey's paw that gives him three wishes, and so he would wish for things. But like one of his wishes was, he wished for money. And what ended up happening is the monkey's paw granted the wish, but his son died later that day in a tragic factory accident, and so he received some proceeds from the workers' compensation policy. Like that's how the wishes were fulfilled. It reminds me of that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, I mean, I think one kind of rebuttal to this that like lots of people make and that I've made is that like if you think about if you just interact with like existing AIs like even ChatGPT just a little bit, like these are not hyper autistic robots that have no idea how to understand like context and unexpressed intentions and subtext, right? Like ChatGPT will totally be able to understand that if a human says I want anything I touch to turn into gold, he like has an exception in mind for things like food and water and medicine, right? But there is well, like this by itself doesn't save us, and it gets a little bit more tricky to sort of explain why, right? But like, I can try. Basically, yeah, I mean, the best analogy, unfortunately, is kind of like looking at some of the previous generation of AI that we've had. Like, remember back in the mid 2010s when people were starting to work with deep learning AIs for the first time and they were starting to get like kind of good at making pretty pictures? And there's like a thing that you can do where you can run the model forwards. And if you run the model forwards, you pass in an image and it tells you, like, is this thing a cat or is this thing a dog? But then you can also run the model backwards, right? And you can pass in the input that, like, I want the ultimate essence of a dog. Like, I want the thing that really is going to be 100% dog. It's going to maximize the extent to which this classifier is going to tell me that this thing is definitely a dog and it's not something else. And then you run it through and it generates the image that maximizes that. And it turns out that what you get is totally not a dog, right? What you get is like some insanely crazy contraption that definitely like has doggy aesthetics, but it's also got, I mean, like maybe 12 eyes, maybe 48 eyes. Maybe there's like a whole bunch of dogs that have merged bodies. It just like looks like some totally crazy thing.
I'm
And
getting visuals of a kaleidoscope of a dog.
Right, exactly, right? And like this is the thing that like maximizes the dog parameter, right?
Mm,
And I think another example is like us humans have sort of hacked evolution in the same way, right? So like if you think about what evolution is like this agent that has a goal, right? And its goal is to like maximize the reproductive fitness. So, survival times how many children you have of whatever agents it's operating on in their environments, right? And in order to fulfill this objective, evolution gave humans a lot of desires, right? Like there is the desire to have food, the desire to have delicious food, right? And like what is delicious and what isn't delicious, well, those are things that were fine-tuned based on like what is nutritious in the natural environment, right? And then there's the a lot of desires associated with reproduction. There's like desires associated with survival and all kinds of things, right? But then look at how modern humans have dealt with these desires, right? And one is we've created a lot of food that's like hyper optimized for deliciousness that in a lot of cases doesn't do well at all on nutritional value, right? We've invented at least like five separate different types of technology that let people have sex without getting pregnant, right? We've um, invented all kinds of things that like satisfy the proxies that evolution has created in our minds for evolution's goals, but that do not actually satisfy evolution's goals at all, right? And the results of this is that like lots of people are eating unhealthy food, and there's increasingly a depopulation crisis with lots of countries having fertility rates that are below one, right? And so it's now, one thing you might ask is like, well, surely, like we as humans know that we are not following the goals of Mother Nature. And the answer is yes, we know very well that we're not following the goals of Mother Nature. But guess what? We are humans. Our goal, like the in maximizing reproductive fitness is the goal that Mother Nature had. It is not the goal that we have. And we
mm,
know that Mother Nature was not able to perfectly sort of copy its goal into us, but we don't
mm,
care. We have our goals and we follow what our goals are, right?
mm,
And so, in the case of AI, what might happen is like we tell the AI, like as Alex Friedman would say, to like, like bring more love and peace into the world. And then the AI would discover that like, okay, here's a bunch of things that look like love and peace. And these are things that we would all recognize as being love and peace. But then at some point it would discover, like, wait, if I create this 47-dimensional squiggly that looks in this particular way, then, like, it's going to be even better at satisfying its own internal conception of, like love and peace, which is going to be slightly off because anything that is created by any finite process is going to be slightly off. And this 47-dimensional squiggly is going to look incredibly lovely and peaceful to the AI, but it's like nothing that any of us would recognize as being love and peace in any sense, right? And then we go and tell the AI, bring more love and peace into the world, and then the AI just kills all of us and replaces us all with 47-dimensional squigglies, right? So this is kind of the AI safety case, right? I mean, this is basically the same as, like what I remember Eliezer Yudkowsky told you guys, and it's sort of the same thing as what a lot of people
mm,
have said. So this is like one of my points of concern regarding AI, but in my post, I also talked about two other points of concern regarding AI, where one of them is just this question of like, well, even if everything goes well, like, is this actually a world that we would want to live in, right? And it turns out that like if you examine the sci-fi worlds that people have tried to come up with that show, humans and bots living in harmony, then like either the world is like insanely unrealistic and it's just unstable and it's just obviously going to collapse into AIs dominating everything in what like in another 1 to 10 years, or it's like a world that actually really feels quite deeply unsatisfying from like most people's perspectives today, right? Like we're basically talking about a world where we all become pets of the superbot, and a kind of human agency doesn't really play any part determining which way the universe goes from there,
And by the
right?
way, Vitalik, for those
Mm.
that maybe doubt that a bunch of machines or a bunch of
Mm.
computers could actually wrest control over humanity, when I was reading your article, I was in kind of a serious mood and I was drinking some coffee. I literally spat out my coffee laughing at this turn of phrase you used. You said this: to see why the machines could wrest control over humanity, imagine that you are legally a literal slave of an 8-year-old child. If you could talk with that child for long enough time, do you think you could convince the child to sign a piece of paper setting you free? I have not run this experiment, but my instinctive answer is a strong yes. And so, all in all, humans becoming pets seems like an attractor that is very hard to escape. I was just visualizing in my mind trying to convince an 8-year-old child to set me free and what that process would look like. And that's kind of what we're dealing with when we're dealing with a super intelligence. It's to them, we would be that 8-year-old child. It would have
Yeah.
probably no trouble convincing us to do whatever it wants, to fulfill whatever outcome and set of goals that it had.
Yeah, and then the other thing to keep in mind is that, like, to the extent that there is any notion of competition in this world of the future, like, whoever really gives up control of the reins to the AI is going to outperform the people that don't, because,
Right.
like, that's what happened in chess, that's what happens in Go, that's, just what eventually happens anywhere, right? So. That and then the third risk that I outlined is basically centralization and surveillance, right? And this isn't even just a risk of super intelligent AI; it's a risk of like basically AI of the type that exists already. And this is actually, in some cases, situations that happen already, right? One of the things that's been happening in Russia for the past while, actually, even quite a bit before the recent war started, is that you'd have protests, right? And the unfortunately, the authoritarians discovered this one weird trick, which is you let the protest happen, and you know, you send the police out, and like you do the usual like protest versus police thing a little bit, but like you don't aim to crush it right then and there.
Hmm.
But you have the cameras out, and then you identify who all of the key people in the protest are, and then at some point later at 2 a.m. they get a knock on the door,
Mm.
and like repeat and rinse about 100 times, and 5 years later, suddenly you have like basically almost no one left to lead the protests, right?
And meanwhile, every other
And
single country is like, oh, this is a normal functioning, society who's expressing their desires, and they are free to express their desires.
exactly, yeah, it's like much less visible, which makes it kind of much more difficult to coordinate against. It makes it much more difficult to even create outrage against it internationally. Yeah, I mean, it's a big problem. I mean, I think it's like a big part of the reason why, like it feels like protests against authoritarian regimes have been getting less and less effective for the past while.
Hmm.
And like if you just extrapolate this trend even further, then the risk basically is that like there isn't a place to hide anymore, right? Like
Mm.
there isn't a place where any kind of credible opposition movement to a government could even start, because as soon as it starts, the surveillance can detect it. And you don't even need like physical police. At some point, the AI soldiers could just, I could go and shut it down. And this gets even worse when we think about wars, because like the need to get the population on your side has historically like actually been a pretty significant break, at least slowing down people's desires to go to war. But then if your entire army is a bunch of robots, then like, the dictator gets drunk at 10 p.m. They see someone being mean to them on Twitter at 11 p.m. and the drones, like start flying and raining hellfire on other countries before midnight, right? And so this like, kind of natural check and balance that comes from the fact that like whatever ultimately there are decentralized humans that have to be doing the executing, And if you try to do something really terrible, then like those humans are going to be demoralized, and they're going to be much less. They're going to be much less willing to go along with your plans, and even if they do, lots of them are going to leak every single detail of your plans to the CIA or to whoever your opposition is, which is actually yet another thing that fortunately did happen in Russia. Like once like you have AI armies, like all of those checks and balances go away, right? And so this is my other big concern about AI. Like basically, is this sort of the ultimate centralization from which at some point there might not actually be an escape. So those three cases are my kind of big like note of caution on artificial super intelligence in particular, and how it's like pretty unique and pretty different from all the other technologies that we've dealt with over the past like 10 millennia.
Okay, Vitalik. So David's gonna come and summarize this in a moment. So we're tracking our journey so far through this, and then we want to kind of introduce your philosophy here and what you think the counter is and how that applies to crypto. But I have one follow up question that to you specifically that's been kind of burning in me since the Eliezer podcast back in February, and that is, what do you think? Like, so we talked about three different AI risk scenarios. The first is doom, basically we all die. The second is we become pets, and I'm like, at this stage it's better than one, that's not so bad. And then the third is totalitarianism. But I want to go back to the first, because that's been giving me like an existential crisis all year. What's your personal take on this? I know you've got a spectrum in your article on what you called earlier the probability of doom, the p doom ratio. What's your p doom ratio, and why? I'm just curious where you weigh in.
Yeah, so the number I gave in my tweet thread is 0 0.1. So, 10% chance super intelligent AI is going to kill us all. And I think the reason for this is like, I see both sides of the argument, right? Like, I see the sort of quote doomer argument, which basically is essentially what I've already outlined to you guys. And then I think if I had to give the counter doomer argument, I would basically say something like, look at the kinds of AIs that we have now. Like those kinds of AIs are not even goal seekers. They basically are things that, like put on human costumes and sort of play out roles of the type that, of like whatever type they sort of pattern match themselves into thinking that they're in at that particular moment, right? Like ChatGPT does not act like something that maximizes any particular objective. And like if you tell it to make the world more doggy, like it's not going to do anything that looks like maximize the essence of dog, right? It's going to just do like give you a 5 paragraph essay that's like a pretty normal and human thing that like expresses like what might it mean to make the world a more doggy place, and it's the sort of thing that's like pretty inoffensive, and like it looks like pretty fine, right? So basically, if you just compare the specific scenarios that people worrying about AI feared would happen with AI at current level of capabilities, and then you compare that to like the actual thing that AI at current levels of capabilities does, and like it's always quite different, right? And one thing I'm happy about is that I feel like the level of like harm from deep fakes in particular so far has been much lower than what I think most people expected, and even what I expected at current levels of capabilities, right? Like if you explain to someone from back in 2015 what the current level of capabilities of AI making deepfakes is, like they're probably going to tell you like, whoa, like we can't trust anything that people say anymore, like this is going to totally break elections and it's going to lead to all kinds of horrible consequences. And like some bad stuff has happened, but like the reality is much less than that fear, right? Which is like interesting and surprising, and like it. I mean, to some extent, it shows the adaptability of mankind. To some extent, it shows that mankind is less evil than some people fear. And then of course the doomer would sort of counter by saying, well, guess what? Like with super intelligence, neither of those two things even matter because the AI is going to be doing all the work. But like it does still feel true that sort of the way that things keep progressing do sort of go in different directions than what like people's existing worst fears have been, and in ways that sometimes feel like we're going further and further away from the kinds of like hyper optimizers that people are afraid of. So that's the case against. And if I had to like again counter the counter, I would say, well, that's LLMs. And it's in looking very possible that like LLMs basically tap out at some level of capability. And like GPT-4 and like a little bit better than GPT-4 is like basically what we're going to get. But then there's going to be some next technology which like could be combining LLMs and Q learning, like it could be something else. And like we don't even know what properties that next level of technology is going to have. And so it's like a big washout, right? And so I think like there's a big chance that the AI doom problem is just like it turns out that it was never that big a problem to begin with. There is like a big chance that it is a really big problem, and within that chance, there's a really big chance that it is a really big problem. But with awareness and hard work, we will be able to deal with it and like make sure that we don't actually get doomified, right? So that's where sort of I think the balance comes in, right? But like it's important to keep in mind that like a 10% probability of doom is still a big deal,
Yes.
right? So like for example, like one analogy for this is like 10% is like I think greater by somewhere between a factor of 1 and 3, I forget, like, but it's like that, like only a little bit greater than the probability that any of us is going to die from a non-biological cause. And so if you think about
an
like
accident,
the
a car
amount
accident
of
or something like this.
right, car accident, homicide, suicide, like any nasty thing that's not disease, then like if you think about the amount of just like care and effort and thought that you personally put into your physical safety and the amount of like care and concern that you expect like governments to put into your physical safety with things like police, then like roughly that level of care is a reasonable level of care to have about the possibility that something really bad is going to happen out of AI, right? And and that doesn't mean like overturn the entire world to suddenly care about this problem, but it does definitely mean care about the problem more than we do today.
If you enjoyed all of that, then you'll absolutely love the Bankless newsletter. Join over 300,000 fellow readers, all for free. Click below to sign up.